Welcome students. This is a video that will go over what we talked about as far as fractals and tessellations. So this will be a review and we'll talk about it a little bit more. Okay, this first screenshot I have here, these are hand-drawn fractals and tessellations. And I think the big idea to remember about tessellations is they can be complex, but when you compare them to a fractal, they're a lot different. So on my left here are two tessellations, on my right here are two fractals, and both of these are hand drawn. So this looks like this is maybe material on a cloth, and you can see that there's a repeating pattern, and the repeating pattern is not very complex when you take into account how complex the fractal is. Okay. You can see that this resembles a tree, so that should be a dead giveaway that this is a fractal. And if I zoom into this, you can see that the normal pattern right here of one splitting into two is just repeated over and over again, even on a minute scale. So that's a dead giveaway that this has to be a fractal. Now, if you look at these tessellations, it's just the same thing over and over again. It doesn't vary in size. It may be a little bit more complex, but still it doesn't vary in size. But when you look at the when you look at the fractal, this looks like these are supposed to be butterflies. And if I could zoom in a little bit more, and if I had a better picture of this, you could see there's probably little butterflies, and that pattern's being repeated here in the center as well along the edges. Okay, so remember the idea of a tessellation. They can be complex, but when you compare them to a fractal, there's no comparison on the complexity. Tessellations are usually very simple in comparison, and the pattern is rather large rather than very intricate like we see on the outside edge of this one right here. Okay, so these are hand-drawn ones. Let's take a look at some other ones. These are fractals that appear in nature. Let me zoom out a little bit. Fractals and tessellations that appear in nature. So if you look here, this is a shot from a satellite. You can see that this has to be a river. And if you look at it really, really close, it kind of resembles a tree. So I know it's not as symmetric like this one that we looked at here, but the idea is still the same. So natural tessellations and natural fractals won't be a really perfect pattern, but you'll see that general pattern. Here we have a set of lungs that has that tree type shape where it keeps branching off, so that's a natural fractal. You see that this is a very small pattern, but it doesn't change in size, so that's a dead giveaway that this has to be a tessellation versus a fractal. Here we can see a pineapple, and what's interesting about a pineapple, it's a tessellation, and if you see these spirals, as they spiral around, it has a Fibonacci sequence built into it. So I think one of the trick questions on this quiz is the idea that the Fibonacci sequence is always involved in anything in nature, and that's not true. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So if you look at this one, this is a natural tessellation. The shapes are very large. Maybe they have a little bit different shapes, but it's that idea of cracking mud, so to speak, and it's not very elaborate. It's not very complex. So this is definitely a natural tessellation. And I know there's been one on the quiz that a lot of people have had a difficult time with, and I think one reason why is because the picture isn't very big. So remember the idea of large and small scales. So you can see that the eyes of this peacock tail are very close together in a small pattern, and they kind of get farther and farther out as they grow. So this is definitely not a tessellation because the pattern is getting smaller and larger. So this has to be a fractal. So that should help out there. Okay, the next bunch of pictures that we're going to look at are ones that are computer generated. So again, this is very kind of elaborate. It's kind of complex, but if you zoom in there and look at it, you can see that you have the star in the center. They're kind of like diamonds. So it's a complex pattern, and it repeats, but they're kind of it's rather on the large side. Now if I look at, let's take a look at these over here. And what's interesting about these, this is a 3D printing. And here you can see that it's made out of very small triangles and very large triangles. And here we have one that's a cube, kind of like that antenna that one video talked about. And here we have some other shapes, but you can see how the large piece right here is on a different scale on really small level. Okay, so that's definitely, and what's unique about these are a 3D fractal. Okay, let me zoom back out here. These are the ones I like. If I zoom in really close, if I had a better picture, you can see that these little things right here is probably a repeat of this one right here, but it's on a smaller scale, where this is on a larger scale. And so here we have kind of the snowman effect, and probably if you look over here, this is probably another big one that loops on the back. So that is definitely a fractal. So a dead giveaway is this fractal has large patterns, small patterns, different scales, and its complexity is just off the scale when you compare it to a fractal that's done on, or a tessellation done on a computer. This one's done on a computer right here. Yet it's all the same size, all the same pattern over and over again, and they could maybe make these stair steps a little bit tinier, but it would still be the same idea. There's no scale factor involved where you have the tiny ones versus the larger ones and everything in between. Now this is definitely a tessellation. This is computer generated, and you can see the shapes just repeat, kind of like a Y. It gives it kind of a 3D effect, but that's definitely a tessellation, and it is very small, very detailed, but it doesn't compare when you look at a fractal. Okay, so hopefully that's will help you. So the big idea here is fractals is, in comparison with tessellations, they're just a lot more complex, more small detailed, and a tessellation, they have a larger pattern that stays on the same scale. It stays the same size, where fractals will be very tiny and very large. So hopefully this will help you to review for that tessellation fractal quiz, and you can do better on it. So thanks for viewing, and bye-bye.